But my last little person here, Alan, you will remember this.
Yes.
I have always had beautiful Mauna Loas from you. And the last one I had just sort of grew and grew and grew and had an amazingly long stem. And then it fell over one day.
Yeah.
And I cut back the stem. And this is what's grown from that one stem.
Oh, that's marvellous.
Isn't that wonderful? I'm so...
And she has just erupted, has she not?
Yes.
The volcano that she's named after.
Yes, exactly. I shall show her on the news if I can find it. Look.
Hello and welcome to episode 102 of Talking Dirty. Over at East Ruston Old Vicarage in a very fetching green and navy ensemble with matching green glasses, we have Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our happy and very handsome horticulturalist.
And on this very grey day here in East Anglia, it's just starting to rain outside, everybody, we have the ever beautiful and absolutely blossoming Thordis Fredrickson. I forgot your middle names.
Oh, never mind.
Fredrickson, everybody.
Round by the day and loving it. And back on the podcast, wearing a very fetching Brora sleeveless sweater / vest / tank top, we have Val Bourne, our galanthophile, our wonderful award-winning gardener in our midst. Happy New Year. How the devil are you?
I am exceedingly well. I'm trying not to eat too much Christmas cake, but that's not difficult here because the best beloved is very territorial about the Christmas cake and says, oh, no, I don't think you should have a slice. I think you should have yogurt, which is what he said yesterday. So I'm in good, fine form, definitely.
Is yogurt often a replacement for Christmas cake? Because I don't feel like the two are interchangeable, really.
Well, the thing is that if I have the yogurt, then when I go out or turn a blind eye or I'm in my study, the Christmas cake mysteriously goes down. And the annoying thing is, he's 6'5.5", 6'6". He doesn't seem to put on any weight. Whereas I only have to look at a slice of Christmas cake and I've gone...
We've all got one of those in the house. They're very irritating, these people who just consume all the food and where does it go? Did you just say it started raining where you are on the other side of the country?
Yes, it's been raining for some time here. I mean, it's another glorious day in paradise in the Cotswolds because we have had nothing but rainy days, except yesterday was a lovely day here. But of course, I was held to the desk by an article, so I couldn't go out. Now, today I can't go out. Tomorrow I can't go out. Thursday I can go out, and it's another rainy forecast. And it's making gardening so difficult because, you know, you're sliding about on mud and all the snowdrops are coming up. The leaves came down late. The weeds are growing. I'm thoroughly depressed. Well, not really.
Well, fortunately, you have those burgeoning clumps of snowdrops to beckon you on and fill you with glee. And this is really my first year of being able to go out and see what exciting little clumps of snowdrops there are. Somehow, one or two of my labels have vanished, and they're in a raised bed. I don't know how it's happened, but I can't identify one or two of them until they flower, and hopefully I will be able to then. But things like wasp and diggory, they're there in fine form, these clumps coming up, and I'm bursting with joy.
You know, Thordis, the trick is that you have to do two labels, one that you can see and one that you bury. And if you, I mean, Richard Hobbs does this. If you're planting, you go to the right or to the left, whichever suits you, and always to the same direction, to the side of your clump, and you bury a label there, and then you've always got it.
Yes, that's a good idea. I put one behind and one in the front. And then when they get a bit shabby, I make some new ones. I use Dymo tape and I put them in. So I end up with an enormous amount of labels. And the best beloved is very unkind. And he calls my Snowdrop collection the National Collection of White Labels.
Well, I can understand that, but in actual fact, it's something about labels that I don't like. I really don't. And I get castigated here for not labeling plants enough. But I try to label every plant when it goes into the garden. But, you know, visitors can be very sneaky, and they'll pinch a label rather than write it down for themselves.
Oh well, I think there are label elves that go round in the night.
Yeah, I think that's what we'll call them.
I'm looking at some of mine and I'm thinking, there's no label there. I hope I recognise you. And
Yeah.
you don't recognise them all. You recognise the distinctive ones, but then a lot of them escape you. But that's part of the fun. Actually, what I really like to do in my extreme old age is pull all the blessed labels out and just let them get on with it.
Are there any clumps that you have been peering at through the endless days of rain and getting excited about because they're looking bountiful, or you're enjoying the combinations of them with other plants, other neighbours?
Yes, well, I've got an apricot tree. I think it's an apricot tree. Yes, it is brown, the apricot. I've got an apricot tree, and I planted some Mrs Macnamara around it, which is the most amazingly tall, robust snowdrop. Flowers at Christmas. And I'm gradually putting it all around the tree. And woody plants are fantastic. If you can plant your snowdrops close to shrubs or close to trees that are bare at this time of year, the overhead canopy provides more warmth and the roots drain the soil. So the bulbs are very, very happy. And they really are the star performers at the moment. But I've already had a lot out that have gone over. And I blinked and missed one called peshmenii. I went up to it the other day and it had got seed heads. And I thought, oh, I haven't seen you flower. So there's lots of exciting snowdrops coming up. And they came up in a rush when it went warm after the cold weather.
Yeah, I know.
Which is why I've been out in the garden so much trying to get the debris off them. Because they're just rushing up. Are yours the same, Alan?
They are indeed. I mean, we had that, I don't know about you, but we had an unprecedented cold temperature here for about 4 days. We went down to -4.
Yes.
Which is very cruel for us. I mean, we're normally, just above freezing or just below, and that's quite something. But I'll tell you what amazed me, Val, was after that, the warmth came back and suddenly everything is opening again. I went to the kitchen window and looked out 3 days after the frost had gone and the warmth, and there's a camellia with 6 flowers on it.
Yes, I know, it's amazing. I mean, snowdrops are definitely prompted into flower by warmth.
Yes.
But, if we get those cold, sunny winters, that sort of promotes things like crocuses and cyclamen to flower. Yeah. So that I couldn't pick masses from my garden today. It was raining very heavily and I didn't really want to go out. But there's not a lot out. There's, just a few shrubby things. A lot of the things that I might expect to be out, like a few early crocuses, are still hunkering down, and there's no sign of an aconite yet.
Well, talking about aconites, I went yesterday, and just the common old Eranthis hyemalis.
Yes.
Outside my back door, there's a patch of it. And I thought, there's one there, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I went and looked at some of the more expensive purchases, and I found that there were actually 6 different aconites out, 6 varieties.
Oh, well, that's you being nearer the coast, because you were talking about going down to -4. I think we were more like -6 to -7, because we're not that far from Benton in Oxfordshire that went down really low.
Yeah.
And we are cold here. So
Cold Ashton.
Cold Aston, indeed.
Aston, yes, sorry.
Aston, not Ashton. No, that's possibly tropical compared to me. Cold here.
I really wish I'd paid more attention to the temperature in my own garden, but I've said before, the Cambridge University Botanic Garden, which is 20 minutes drive away, and hopefully in an exposed spot, -15. And I really hope it didn't do that in my garden, but I doubt it did.
No.
My little sort of suburban small plot with a bit more protection and lots of houses around it.
Yeah, buildings make a huge difference. I mean, one of the reasons that we're cold here, but we've got a long cottage that faces south, and it's a bit like a storage radiator. So the area sort of close to the house doesn't get nearly as cold. And it's, as the garden's got more planted up, it's a lot warmer than the field. So the field will often be really frosty, but the garden won't. And it's taken a long time to get to that stage.
Yeah.
And you mentioned removing debris. I don't think we really need to tell viewers and listeners to this podcast, because you're all such great plants people, but it is obviously important when so many things have been destroyed by the cold weather and have gone all floppy and there's a lot of mush around, to kind of get out there and make sure that your snowdrop clumps and your special things are cleared of that.
Yes. Well, I normally do that in September, October time, and get it looking as pristine as I can, and I collect the leaves. But because it was so mild and it was such a hot summer, they hung onto their leaves really late.
Yeah.
And some of the leaves were enormous. I had hazel leaves that were the size of my palm on my sort of purple hazel, and they came down really late in the cold weather. So it was December. And then I didn't really worry about them. I thought, oh, it's fine. And then I noticed that the snowdrops had punctured the leaves. So I thought, well, I'm going to get those leaves off because I want the snowdrop clumps to look really nice. So I've been doing lots of leaf gathering. And people often say to me, what do you do in the winter? Well, I find it's an incredibly busy time. I don't know about you, Alan. Are you very busy in the winter?
Stupid question, Val.
Yes, yeah. Well, you know, a lot of people don't have much to do in the winter.
They put their garden to bed in the autumn, which is a silly thing to do, I always think.
Yes, it is.
You know, I mean, there's nothing better to get than, it may be cold, it may be slightly inconvenient, but I mean, get out. If there's no such thing as the wrong weather, just the wrong clothes. So if you wrap yourself up warm and you get out in the garden, you can enjoy it.
Yes. I mean, people often ask me at this time of year where I've been on holiday.
Yes.
And they say, oh, you've obviously been away. And I say, no, I've just been in the garden, because you do get this sort of glow.
Yeah.
Not sure how glowing I am today. I'm never as glowing as Mr. Gray.
Nobody is.
Don't you?
I gave up competing a long time ago.
Yes.
So in your sort of foray into your plot, what did you manage to find today for a spot of show and tell?
Well, I haven't really got flowers to show and tell, but what I'm showing and telling are my apples, because I do a lot of pruning in the winter. And I'm very wedded to my felcoes. And if you notice, my felcoes get really muddy. And I think that every gardener, I don't know whether you see it, every gardener, these are felco number 2s. But I also use felco number 6s. And I have some of those wonderful Jenner's gardening trousers with the slots either side. And I keep them in there. And then I'm going around doing my pruning, and suddenly I miss a pair of secateurs. And I think, oh, they've got red handles. I'll find those dead easily. And I come in and I say to the best beloved, I've lost my secateurs. And I think there, because I can't reach into the wheelie bin, you see, because I'm not tall enough. So I send him out, and then I sort of say, well, I really need a metal detector, because I love that program, The Detectorists. And then he always says that he's the husband metal detectorist. I probably got that wrong. He's in the next room. He'll tell me off. The human detectorist, I think he said. Oh, I said, I'll go and be the human detectorist. And then he finds my secateurs for me. So I've been doing lots and lots of pruning. And when we came here, there was nothing in the garden. And we had a discussion about apple trees. And Joe said, the best beloved, I don't really want fruit trees. But I did, and I promised him apple pies. So I just went and planted them. And this apple here, we've only got 3 apples. I'm not sure how, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get it the right way. This one is called Blenheim Orange.
Oh.
And it's a wonderful apple. You can't buy it in the shops.
That's the apple that my grandfather said will keep until apples come again.
Yes, it does keep for a long, long time.
Good
and
story.
It's dual purpose. So you can cook it and it gets a Turkish delight flavour, or you can chop it up. And we have apples every morning for breakfast on the top of the muesli. And I think it does, all the skin, the flavonoids in the skin do keep you healthy, definitely. Yep. So this is one apple, and the Blenheim Orange is a very untidy tree. It's a bit like a sea monster. It doesn't have many branches, but they spread everywhere. And the other apple that we grow is this one, and this is an East Anglian apple called Darcy Spice, and it's a very aromatic russet-like apple. And this tree is actually a very upright soldier. It doesn't go very wide, but it goes very, very tall. And then the other apple, this is rather a scrotty specimen, is Pitmaston Pineapple. And these are very small, and really we should thin them out, and we never do. But the grandchildren used to love these little apples when they were tiny. And one of the jobs I've been doing, or thinking about doing, I haven't finished it yet, is pruning the apples. Because I've got a piece of apple wood here. And,
nice view of your jumper there, Val.
Sorry?
Nice view of your fair isle.
Yes, I love my fair isle. And you perhaps can't see, but this wood here is very, very dull. I've got to try and get it in the summer. This wood here is very, very dull, so it's last year. And then you've got this shiny brown wood, which is this year's wood. And actually, considering it was a dry summer, this is a Pitmaston Pineapple branch that I took off because it was too low. And it's a good time of year if you've got branches that are too low or crossing to saw them off and leave a stump by the trunk so that they've got room to sort of seal and everything. They won't damage. And then you've got all this shiny new growth, which is probably about 18 inches. And what you've got to do with your secateurs is cut it back away from the bud so that you're slanting it away from the bud, and you're removing most of it, because what you're trying to do is to get the apple tree to produce side shoots, because that's where the fruit is. It'll form fruit buds, which are much plumper. And so all the apple trees, the 3 apple trees that we've got, and Pitmaston Pineapple is a bit like one of those Jewish candlesticks. It's a sort of menorah shape. I think it's menorah. Don't correct me. So I'm pruning back the apple trees so that I can actually pick the fruit, because if I just left that growth to go year after year, the apple tree would get taller and taller, but I wouldn't get much fruit. So you're actually sort of promoting the fruit buds by winter pruning.
If you take that piece of pruning that you've got in your hand and you cut those long pieces off,
yes,
put the lower piece, the chunky piece, in some water, those buds could well open for you, because that's what we used to do with apple prunings when I was a child.
Right. I hadn't realised that. But you know, you're sort of, I would cut them down to about there and slant them away from the bud.
On that lower branch, you have some fruiting spurs, I can see.
Yes, I have got some fruiting spurs. There's not many on this one, but you can see they're here.
Yeah.
And as they come out. And I mean, the apple trees are such good wildlife plants. Because you've got their blossom in the spring, you've got the fruit which you can eat, which in these days of tight budgets is quite a saving. And I'm going to look up how many insects, 93 different insects go onto apple trees. So they're very, very, and birds love them. Blue tits will get the grubs off the tree in the spring for their nestlings. The blackbirds will eat the fallen fruit. They're a really good wildlife tree. So, you know, it's worth, if you're trying to be a natural gardener, actually having a few apple trees. And of course, you know, it appeals to the Yorkshire lady in me, because I don't have to go and buy apples in the winter. It was such a bumper crop last year as well. Did you have a bumper crop?
We did. Yeah, we did.
Yeah,
and
I think everybody
got
did.
Castigated by visitors more than once for not picking them all.
Yes.
I mean, we had what we wanted. And as everybody else that works here does as well, they help themselves.
Yes.
But the rest of them, I tried to explain to people, like you just said, the rest of the apples that have fallen on the ground, they get eaten by other things. I mean, blackbirds, thrushes, or whatever, and all the other little bits and pieces that come along, the voles and mice and goodness knows.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
You know,
and
so
even the rats, probably.
It's and it's a full circle thing, isn't it?
Yes. And this one, Darcy Spice, is actually meant to be picked. I can't do this. Actually meant to be picked on bonfire night.
Oh,
it's a really late picker. That's when you're supposed to pick it. But we're so windy here that when we get these equinoctial, I can never say that word.
Equinoctial.
Thank you. Gales around, you know, the end of September.
Yeah.
If we haven't picked our apples, they all end up on the floor. So this was picked really too early. But, you know, by planting 2 or 3 varieties that flower at the same time and getting 3 distinct different apples that store till different lengths of time, you can have apples from about October right the way through to May if you're lucky.
Yeah.
And over here in our part of the country, we've got the East of England Apples and Orchards project, where you can go and find your specific varieties from your county. Obviously, Norfolk has loads, Cambridgeshire, because of all of the jam makers in Histon and stuff. We have various Cambridgeshire varieties as well. In your part of the world, do you have like a similar project? Where did you get your nice varieties from?
Well, I actually got mine from Waterperry Gardens, and I didn't go for particularly local apples. I went for apples that I like to eat. And this Darcy Spice apple, I really do enjoy it. It's a russet, but it's not a it's not a very dry russet. It's just got a nutmeggy flavour. I really like eating it. But I talked to an apple expert called Barry Juniper, who was one of the was at one of the universities in Oxford, and he said, "Oh, Val, you'll never grow that." But it has actually gone very, very well. It does grow very, very well here, because we've got, on top of the Cotswolds, we haven't got a huge water table. So actually the area where it is, it's quite dry. And then this Blenheim Orange, that obviously came from the Blenheim estate at Woodstock.
That's such a pretty apple, isn't it?
I know, it was originally called Kempster's Pippin, after the gardener who found it on the estate and planted it in his garden. But a fruit grower wanted to propagate it and give it a posher name that became Blenheim Orange. And this is actually probably quite a lowland apple. This apple took years to get going. Threatened it with a replacement for a Bramley. I said, if you don't start growing, because it was just a stick. And I think one of the things I've learned is that when you're buying a fruit bush, go to a specialist grower and avoid a maiden. Let them do the pruning. Let them, shape the bush, and you spend a bit more on a proper fruit tree that's already showing some sort of shape, because this thing was like a stick in a pot for probably 4 or 5 years, until I said, if you don't do better, you're coming out. And then it seemed to sort of buck up a bit.
Amazing how those threats do the trick, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Well, if the question is, how do you like them apples? The answer is very much. Thank you.
Yes.
For some appley show and tell.
Yes. So I haven't got any plants this time. I have apples. And can I talk about pruning for a little longer? Or would you like me to?
We love talking about pruning.
Right. Well, I've also been pruning my roses, and I have to get up and show off my sweater again. Right. I've got quite a lot of dieback on my roses, and I think it's that hot summer.
Could be.
Because I pruned them, obviously, and there's you can't actually see it that well, but there's that much dieback on here, and that's really bad news. And you could cut it down to there, but I suspect that if you cut through there, no, actually that's not true, but quite often there's already a dark spot in the middle where the rose is going to die back even further. So I've been cutting back my roses, and I think pruning roses is very, very important. And I grow a lot of roses here, and I have a lot of floribunda roses, and they're those roses that repeat flower, and they form clusters of flower. So sometimes they're called cluster flowered roses. And for some reason, rose growers have got it into their head that floribunda roses aren't popular, because they didn't used to be terribly good, but they are good now. And a lot of rose growers are growing them. And I grow one, for instance, called Champagne Moment, which I often talk about. When I prune those, I only cut them down to about 18 inches in height. I don't go very, very low with them because they're not actually as hardy or as vigorous as things like hybrid teas. So I cut those down to about 18 inches, and I try to take out any dead wood, die back, diseased, and make an open shape. And I find it makes a real difference to them. And then in about a month, perhaps 6 weeks' time, depending on the weather, I will give them a good feed of a phosphate-rich rose food. It's not particularly organic. I use Vitax Q4 just to sort of give them a boost. I've also got some hybrid teas, which I use for picking, particularly Chandos Beauty and one called Mary Berry. And I must tell you that Mary Berry came to one of my talks.
Really?
near Headley in Arden. I arrived early and I was stuffing my face with a packet of crisps. Don't tell the best beloved. And somebody knocked on the window. So I thought, oh, I better go in, you know. And I really want to sit there for a few minutes because when you've had a long drive, you just want to go. But you can't park anywhere in the Chilterns apart from this opposite this village hall, which is near Henley. And so I sort of went in, and one of the first people to arrive was Mary Berry. And she came with an article I'd written on the Telegraph about roses, and I'd mentioned her rose. And I'm so pleased to tell you that when I unfolded it, it had tea stains and bacon stains. So I think her husband was involved because she's so pristine, isn't she? I love Mary Berry. And so I took the article home. I should have got her to sign it, shouldn't I? But I was so pleased. Anyway, talking about hybrid teas, they're very sort of vigorous and they go straight up in the air. And you can cut a hybrid tea down to about 5 or 6 inches. And when you're cutting a rose down, what you need to do is look at the buds. So you don't want your roses to grow inwards. So you ignore any inward facing buds and you look for an outward facing bud. And about 1/2 inch above the bud, you make the slanting cut. And then that rose will shoot from there and go outwards. So I'm cutting the hybrid teas down to probably 5 or 6 inches. And if I've got a lot of wood at the base, I will get the pruning saw and saw it out. And I have killed roses doing that when we've had late frosts. So I wish on my Christmas list I could get a metal detector so I can find my secateurs without having to confess to the best beloved that he's got to rummage in the green bin again. And then I wish I could have a crystal ball that would predict the weather.
Don't we all?
Because it's so mild now here. But are we going to be closed down by winter in February when I want to be out and about visiting snowdrop gardens? That is the question.
How much of an impact does it have on your kind of gardening jobs, this uncertainty with the weather? Because like you just said, you can do something at the wrong time and it has, you know, a decimating effect.
Well, I don't worry about it very much. I mean, I just think you have to do what needs doing on the day. And it's so important to get out there and keep on top of it and garden in the winter because you notice all sorts of things. And it's really the only time you can prune fruit trees. It's the best time now on a mild day. You can't do it on a cold day. So you have to get on with it.
I mean, fruit trees, roses, hydrangeas, when the leaves are down, you can actually see the structure of the plant and you can actually see what you're doing. But I'm like you, I'm a great believer in the old maxim that Christo Lloyd always said, it's better to do a job when you think of it than not to do it at all.
Yes, absolutely. And also you can collect the rose leaves off the ground at this time of year because they were late to fall. And you know, with the hotter summer, people are going to get more black spot probably because the rose was weakened by those severe conditions. So I'm very, very careful at this time of year to remove every rose leaf, and I do put that in the green bin, sometimes with my secateurs. But you know, but getting those leaves up is important. And you know, what am I going to do if I don't go out? Sit indoors and eat Christmas cake. So, and some of these rose growths, I mean, this is the stem on the Generous Gardener, which is the most amazing rose. And it's one of the David Austin shrub roses. Well, it's gone up to about 9 feet tall. So I'm afraid this one has been taken down by probably about 5 or 6 feet because I've got roses all along the boundary wall so that they go over. But this is quite an upright rose and it will snap in the wind. So I want to keep it as compact as possible. So I'm sort of, while I'm tidying all those rose leaves up and that area against the wall, I'm also pruning the leaves and making quite a sort of mess. And very shortly, I'll be cutting down the clematis as well. I've already cut some of them down. But you do worry about doing things at the wrong time, but the weather's erratic and it is harder to garden.
The Generous Gardener looks to me as if you could grow it against the wall as a climber as well.
Well, David Austin have got it as a climber now.
Ah.
And but it's very stemmy. but it is the most wonderful rose. I mean, if you've got the room to have a big shrub rose, this generous gardener never actually gets any disease in my garden, and you do get wonderful orange hips on it if you leave the last flowers. It is a very, very good rose, and they do sell it as a climber. I mean, I've got ramblers in my garden as well that flower only once, and I didn't get round to pruning them in November, and they're drip with flower in June. I think it's so important to have these roses. And you take out the old stems. You might take 2 old stems out if you've got 2 wonderful new stems, and you're cutting those down at the base so that you're keeping the rose vigorous and keeping it going for as long as possible. I think the hardest roses to climb prune are actually climbers, because they're so diverse. And
yes, you have to know the habit of the plant that you're actually pruning, I think.
Yes, you do.
We've started to make lots of curls with some of our whippy climbers.
Yes.
And that actually works, believe it or not.
Well, it does, because they do that. They did that anyway at a garden near Burford called, I think it's Astel. It used to be the Mitfords.
Yes.
Yes, they used
That's
to
where
live
I saw it.
Yes, well, I wrote it up in the Telegraph when I noticed it about 10 years ago. There was a gardener called Mark Edwards who was doing like tapestry on the walls with loops.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of pruning roses is actually to slow down the sap, to stop them going straight up. And if you've got a pergola and you loop a rose along like a looper caterpillar, you're slowing the sap down. Or if you're curling it round a post, you'll get more flower, because the rose won't be going straight up. It's a bit like the apple trees. So rose training is quite important, and that is a lovely. It's time consuming. We've got somebody in the village who's made a big heart on the side of the wall, which I think is really fun. I haven't seen the rose flower yet because it's quite a new rose, but I think climbers are really hard. I've got one called Mrs Honey Dyson, which I love. And it's an American rose, and it's a really big, blousy cream rose. But she's very, she's a bit like Lady Hillingdon. If you let her, she'd be up in the gutters.
Yeah.
So I have real trouble pruning her. So I planted a new rose, which was Rose of the Year. It's Rose of the Year this year. And I'm trying to think of the name of it, and I can't. And that's a low climber, a bit like a lower is. And I planted that under Mrs Honey Dyson on the side of the summer house to try to hide all those ugly branches that I can't get Mrs Honey Dyson down on the ground at all. If I cut her, she just goes whoomp again. But she is a lovely rose, and I do love her because she repeat flowers.
Was it called It's a Wonderful Life?
It's a good question. It's an orange climber by Cordes, and it's the Rose of the Year 2023.
Oh, 2023.
Yes. Look it up for me, Alan, because I haven't got my phone.
I'm doing it as we speak.
Yes.
Peach Melba.
Peach Melba, that's it. I got 2 of them. I went to the launch and I bagged two of them that were grown in Germany. Wonderful plants. And I put them at the base of Mrs Honey Dyson. And I managed to water them through the summer, and they were still alive.
Picture here shows a wonderful sort of very full double, and there's orange in the heart of it, but it's kind of peachy and pink and cream as well. And
yes, it's a lovely rose.
Yeah, the petals are beautifully curled. So Rosa Peach Melba looks like a stunner. Well,
the thing about Cordes roses, they're bred in Germany, and the company breed very, very healthy roses. And I'm an organic gardener. I have to have healthy roses. I can't grow anything that gets black spot because I can't spray. So I grow a lot of Cordes roses. Sweet Honey was another one that I really recommend. Champagne Moment I've mentioned. Bring Me Sunshine. Actually, I haven't found that very floriferous, but of course, it's only been in a year or so. And last summer, it was so dry. And I don't water my garden in the dry weather because I think it's a waste of a resource. I water my greenhouse I don't open my garden, I just leave it. And it looked very sad at the end of August. And then I went up to Stone Cottage Nurseries near Kidderminster, which is Louisa Arbuthnot's garden.
Yeah.
And she'd watered, and her garden looked magnificent. And I came back and I thought, but I'm not going to water my borders in dry weather here, because I can't store enough water, and I don't want to use tap water when it's so when it's getting low in reservoirs in summers like we've just had. So I've chosen not to water.
Have we talked before about how that impacts your hyemalis? Because I think you've got quite the witch hazel collection. So how have they been faring after such a dry summer?
Well, I had to water one of them, because what happens with hyemalis is they're Asian plants. They like a wet summer and a dry winter. So we're fighting the conditions here. And there's a lot of bud on them. So they liked the warm weather. And there was one that slanted its leaves and began to look very sick. And I just got a couple of buckets of water and tipped it over every week for probably 4 or 5 weeks. And it hasn't got any flower bud on it, but it's still alive. And I had another one that I thought was dead, which was a new one called, there's a new grace series, orange grace, red grace, yellow grace. And I got them from Mark Straver's Hortus Loci. It was a gift, actually, so I was very keen to keep it alive. I was really worried that it had gone, but it does look as though it's alive. You know, there's no flower, but it looks as though it's got living buds on it. It's a huge worry when you plant something new and then you have a summer like we had, you know, when there's no rainfall. And I did water new plants, but some things like the eryngiums just loved it. And other things like the crocosmias hated it. I never got a crocosmia flower here.
Yeah.
Phlox didn't like it either.
No, actually, there was one phlox that didn't seem to mind it, which was a tall one called Utopia. I don't know whether you know that one. It's probably about 5 foot tall, and it's a sort of cool pink, and it has a petal with a sort of nick in it. So the petals are quite divided. I like it very much. I think it's a Carl Foster. It's certainly an old, but I'd have to look that up as well. It's quite an old variety, Utopia, and that did flower really well. And Bright Eyes was fairly good too, but some of them didn't flower. And I'm thinking, oh, will I take them out? I've taken 1 or 2 things out. And there are plants that you used to rely on, like Helianthus Lemon Queen, which was such a good performer, and it's just failing, you know, most years now. And I'm thinking perhaps I should just take it out. But I mean, you know, it is, I best not swear on the internet. It's somebody's law that if you take it out, you'll end up with a series of wet summers and wish you hadn't. So I'm leaving it at the moment.
Well,
there's a lot of sitting on the fence going on here.
This is like me having had, you know, because I've gardened over the last, I suppose, 12 years or so.
Yes.
I haven't really had a proper hard cold spell like this. You know, it happened very early on in my gardening journey when I wouldn't have noticed really, because I'd have been very largely hardy things. So this was finally the year when I thought, do you know what? My garden's fairly sheltered. I'm going to try all these different things. So we talked about last time the fuchsia procumbens that is almost, well, is going to be dead. I don't know if Podophyllum Dotty has made it. And this year I put Olearia in, Pittosporum, all these things that I'd not tried before, thinking it's been so mild, it'll be fine. And they all look like sticks, and I don't know which of them will or won't come back. But
well, my advice is give them time, because if you lose a hardy fuchsia or you lose something, it will often return, but it won't return until about the early July. So if you can sit on your hands, and you will be busy for it. I can guarantee that. You will wonder where the days have gone. You will be tired. Unless you get an angel that sleeps through the night. And one of mine did, actually.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, lucky you. I doubt I will. From what it's been doing in my stomach, I doubt it's going to be very passive in the real world.
No.
Here she comes. Hey!
We can see you. Can we hear you? We can't hear you. Mute. We definitely don't want you to be mute. I mean, a muted Val Bourne. What is that?
It's like a muted Alan Gray.
Is that working?
Yes!
It's working.
Hooray!
Look at your marvellous tank top. Sleeveless
I
sweater,
know.
whatever it is.
I don't think it's a great colour on me, but I really liked it. So you've had other things to think about, Thordis.
I've been a little disorganised. Would you like to see my bump?
Yes, I'd love to.
She sent me such lovely emails. It's got big now.
Oh, yes.
It's a big old bump.
You look awfully well.
I'm very
I
happy.
found that when I was pregnant, I looked awfully well. Absolutely blooming. My hair was wonderful.
My
And then
hair
I
is
had-
so much better.
Yeah, and I had the children, both of them. And about 4 weeks later, I looked like nothing on earth.